Hi, and welcome to my channel. My name is Asia, and I'm a counselor in training. Today, I'll be holding a discussion on a case study. This discussion will be on the topic of bereavement and grief in adults. We will be evaluating the behaviors of an adult in grief, but I will be specifically focusing on grief in late adulthood individuals. So, along with this discussion, I will be answering a few questions related to the case study and will make reference to this book called Facilitating Growth Through Lifespan Development by Richard D. Parsons. In a moment, I will present the case study where you will have a chance to read over it, after which point I'll just dive right into the content. So stay tuned for the discussion. Hey, thanks for joining us for the discussion. So, as you know, the case study is about a grieving husband named Angelo who just lost his wife, Maria, suddenly due to a heart attack. This case study provides us insight on how Angelo is coping with the loss of his wife, and you can tell by the way that he regards his wife that it is a great loss and that he loved her so. This is to be expected not only because that she was his wife, but also because of the amount of time in their lives that they spent together. It is clear that he leaned on her and came to depend on her for more than just companionship. It was also just for his daily living. In the case study, it notes that Maria managed the family finances, and according to Angelo, he considered her a miracle worker, stretching a dollar, and he saw that he would probably the case study mentions it. He said, "I would probably have starved if she wasn't making meals and getting me to the table." So he came to depend on her just for his daily living, and the loss of her being sudden is different than losing somebody that you already know is in the process of dying, where you eventually know that you will lose that person. It was sudden, so there was no bracing period to prepare him for the loss of his wife. The case study also mentions that following the death of his wife, he showed little emotion. This is not abnormal behavior, as in this case study, it mentions that this is kind of how Angelo is, and that this is his style of addressing challenges in the family. But what Angelo is really doing, what he's expressing, is in a way avoidance, maybe even detachment. Sometimes people do this to get through the hard part, which is planning the funeral, going through all the things, making all the arrangements, and so on. But it's extended past that. Now that the funeral has ended, Angelo has withdrawn mainly from his family and friends. The case study mentions that he spent much of his time looking through old things, reminiscing about the time that they had together, and that he's pretty much declined any invitation to see anybody outside of that. So what we will be addressing is how we will resolve this, or how we would deal with this, as it relates to communicating with the kids about the way that their father is grieving, what could contribute to the intensity of his bereavement, factors that exist that suggest that Angelo's resilience and ability to cope with the loss, and the role that a professional counselor would serve in this situation. So now I will dive into some of the questions that come along with the case study, starting with the first one. Unfortunately, it is hard to determine what would be considered normal grieving. On page 533 of Facilitating Growth Through Lifespan Development by Parsons, Parson notes that the experience of loss is highly individualized. What this means is that loss and how one handles it varies from person to person. So there's no singular or uniform impact on individuals across the board. So when answering the question attached, what I would say is I would be honest with them, letting them know that each person processes grief differently, but that he does show what would be considered bereavement beyond what is normal. You can tell from the case study that it mentions that he's detached himself from the outside world. He's not going out. He politely declines the invitation to see family and friends. He ruminates about their relationship. And something that I would have to tell them is that the loss of a loved one, especially given their closeness, tends to have that kind of impact, especially in late adulthood. For some, the loss and grief process, they display different symptoms. So, what Angela seems to be displaying is the symptoms of a persistent, complex bereavement, especially with social and identity disruption. You can tell this by his lack of willing to participate. Some of the symptoms of this are a desire to die in order to be with the deceased, difficulty trusting other individuals since the death, feeling alone or detached from others, feeling that life is meaningless or empty without the deceased, confusion about one's role in life or diminished sense of one's identity, and difficulty or reluctance to pursue interest or plan for the future. Now, Angelo does not display all of these symptoms, but not having all the symptoms is not indicative of not suffering with persistent complex bereavement. Persistent complex bereavement, by definition, is identified as a condition in which an individual experiences persistent yearning or longing for a deceased person, which may be associated with intense sorrow or preoccupation with the deceased or the manner of death. When considering factors that contribute to the intensity and the duration of Angela's bereavement, there are a couple of things that stand out most. One being that Angelo lost Maria suddenly. She had a fatal heart attack and then she passed. It's different than, having lost somebody that you knew you would eventually lose, rather than being gradual. Not that it makes loss any easier, but there is time to have moments with your loved one, to say your goodbyes, to do last minute life things that you know you won't get to do when they're gone. But Angela lost Maria suddenly, and there wasn't a chance to do those last minute in life things. There wasn't a chance to spend time together, or even really maybe even say goodbye. Maybe Angela didn't have a chance to say goodbye to his wife before her passing. Another factor boils down to independence. As we see from the case study, Angelo said that he would likely go hungry if she wasn't there preparing meals, that she took care of the finances in the home, that she did a lot of things in his life that he didn't have to be concerned about and came to depend on her to do. This is what we call high levels of interpersonal dependence. Parson notes in his book on page 535 that those who experience high levels of interpersonal dependence will more likely experience extended grief. It is possible that Angelo is codependent and therefore lacks resilience. From the case study, we find that his behavior after the loss of his wife is not considered atypical. This is because the case study mentions that this is his style of addressing all challenges in the family. It sounds like he makes himself detached. So, and then maybe deals with it later alone. Not having his wife there, he's not able to deal with it with anybody. So he doesn't really have really good coping strategies, because his means of coping is really isolation, which is not what's best for him, considering that he is a codependent person, and that he has come to depend on her greatly for just his everyday living. Though much of this may be disconcerting, there is still hope for Angelo. It is possible that he could receive help from professional counselors in this. Now, I will say that it's important to remember that grieving and bereavement are not diseases or abnormal conditions. And not everybody who experiences grief may need to go to and receive professional assistance. However, when clients show major depression, anxiety, things of that nature, it may warrant seeing a professional for interventions. There are ways to increase serotonin. A professional counselor could recommend antidepressants, which would increase serotonin and help employ individuals to manage their depressive symptoms. But if you want to go the non-medicated route, there's also grief intervention programs and support groups. These are things that his children could look into for him and even for themselves. It's effective in helping people cope during bereavement, which would be helpful for Angelo, considering that when he deals with hard situations, his coping mechanism is to detach and separate. So grief counseling or grief intervention programs would be the best bet for Angelo. And there you have it. Thank you so much for joining this discussion of this case with me. I have really enjoyed doing this. This is my first time, so give me a thumbs up. If you don't, that's totally fine. I don't know how often I'll be doing this, but I really appreciate you for tuning in, and I hope that you are able to participate in the discussion in the comment section below. Thank you. Bye.